Good morning, afternoon, and evening to all of our participants. Welcome and thank you joining us for this webinar on challenges and trends in digitalizing multimodal supply chains, organized by UNESCAP-ICAO-ICC and ADB. Webinar is part of the webinar series on accelerating cross-border paperless trade facilitation. The topic of the webinar is very relevant at the moment, taking into consideration the current challenges for the global trade. With pleasure, I would like also to mention that we have a high quality of speakers joining us from international partners as well. UNSC to highlight the need for the standards development and the implementation. Electoral highlighting the legal pillars enabling interoperability between stakeholders across the borders, and the private sector associations, industry associations sector representatives to bring their perspective and efforts in this sector. Expect insightful discussions and knowledge sharing on how different stakeholders from multimodal logistics sector can interoperate to ensure smooth, secure, and safe movement of goods and people across the borders. Without further ado, I would like to introduce the excellent speaker's intervention for the opening remarks. We have pre-recorded videos from the co-organizers of our webinar. First, I would like to introduce Mr. Jan Duval, Chief and Trade Policy Facilitation Section, Trade, Investment and Innovation Division of UNESCAP, Mr. Tao Ma, Regional Director, Asia and Pacific Office, International Civil Aviation Organization, Ms. Hannah Ngayo, Director, Digital Ecosystem, ICC Digital Standards Initiative, International Chamber of Commerce, and Mr. Yong Woo Kang, Principal Economist, Economic Research and Cooperation Department, Asian Development Bank. Vanaya, please run the opening remarks from our co-organizers and bidding organizations. Thank you.
So on behalf of UNESCAP, a very warm welcome to all participants and panelists to the 9th webinar in our joint series with ICC and ADB on accelerating cross-border paperless trade. Today's webinar focuses on the challenges and solutions for digitalizing multimodal supply chain. This whole of supply chain approach is really essential if we want to capture the full benefits from cross-border paperless trade. It does require all stakeholders to work together to implement common standards and interoperable solutions. This is extremely challenging indeed, but we're lucky to have a very strong panel of senior experts today to provide us guidance, both from the public and the private sector side. So I'd like to note that this is the first webinar in the series we have organized in collaboration with the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, one of our sister UN agencies. So thank you very much, ICAO colleagues, for collaboration. Today's webinar also features, in fact, speakers from 2 other UN agencies, UNEC and UNCITRAL. So many UN agencies are very active in the field of paperless trade, promoting international standards and instruments applicable across the board, or sometimes focusing on the digitalization of one specific document, like in the case of e-CITES. We at ESCAP look forward to active engagement with all UN partners in the implementation of the Framework Agreement on Facilitation of Cross-Border Paperless Trade in Asia and the Pacific, as the implementation of the UN Treaty is about to kick off next month in April. So thanks again to ADB, ICC, and all panelists for their contribution to today's event. Thank you.
Good day from Bangkok to our esteemed speakers, participants, and all contributing to the success of this first of its kind engagement. The International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, is proud to co-host this webinar with our sister UN agency, UNESCAP, the International Chamber of Commerce, and the Asian Development Bank. I'm Ma Tao, Director of the ICAO Asia Pacific Regional Office. Even before beginning my tenure in late 2021, I recognized the importance of supply chain connectivity in our region, especially the COVID-19 times. Noting the strides that ICAO has made, particularly since the onset of the pandemic, In advancing air cargo digitalization, I want you to hear from me that the ICAO Regional Office supports this effort. In addition, ICAO is leading the digitalization effort by example. Beyond encouraging other stakeholders to digitalize, our Secretary General, Mr. Juan Carlos Salazar, has initiated within the ICAO Secretariat a digital transformation project that will enable our organization to better serve member states and other stakeholders. This brings us to today's discussion, digital transport, with a focus on air cargo operations. For ICAO, it is our priority that air cargo operations are safe, secure, efficient, and sustainable. Ensuring this, ICAO is contributing to a truly resilient global supply chain with these same critical qualities. This webinar will examine various aspects of digital transport that will enable it to benefit stakeholders, including technology, standards, legal frameworks, economic policies, and architectures. Transport has a clear connection with trade. After all, goods must get to markets near and far. These dependencies are why so often we reference them together as a digital transport and trade, and why the standards, policies, and regulations around them should be interoperable and across different domains. This same connection is why I'm pleased the Framework Agreement on Facilitation of Cross-Border Paperless Trade in Asia-Pacific has entered into force. This new UN instrument is an important contribution to UNESCAP to the new digital global economy. Further, it aligns with the newest digital transport provisions, such as those that the ICAO and the UN Economic Commission for Europe just released that provides for interoperability and data exchange between the documents, modes of transport, and sectors. This alignment between the UN agencies is exactly what September 2020 joint statement on the contribution of international trade and supply chains to sustainable socio-economic recovery in COVID-19 times called the signatory UN agencies to work toward. Also important is partnership with industry, which is why the International Chamber of Commerce is an important partner. The 2021 ICAO-ICC joint statement highlighted the importance of working together toward aviation recovery. Now we are realizing many needs around digital transport and trade that our collaboration can satisfy. We are working to further develop our relationships as well explore how to implement new standards and architectures, such as a verifiable credential. Finally, Asia Development Bank make it possible for more states to invest in digital transport and trade. ICAO hopes to cultivate our relationships with ADB so that together we may help member states make such investments in digital infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll end my remarks by thanking you again for your participation in this webinar and reinforcing ICAO's commitment towards air cargo stakeholders. We sincerely appreciate your hard work to help the world through a COVID-19 pandemic, and we look forward to playing a leading role in building back better through using digital technologies to enhance air cargo safety, security, and efficiency, as well as increasing air connectivity through a liberalized economic regulatory framework. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Greetings from the sunny island of Singapore. On behalf of the ICC Digital Standards Initiative, a warm welcome to today's webinar on challenges and trends in digitalizing multimodal supply chains. First, I would like to thank all the co-organizers, colleagues from UNESCAP, ICAO, and the ADB for the excellent support. And thanks to all the speakers as well as participants for taking the time to be with us today. This topic is particularly relevant as the digitalization of supply chains holds much potential to enable our post-pandemic economic recovery and to make our global supply chains more resilient towards current and future shocks. You will hear more from our panelists about some of the challenges that are faced when digitalizing supply chains. And many of these can be traced back to the lack of alignment or awareness of existing standards. That is the impetus behind the ICC Digital Standards Initiative, which was established to accelerate the journey of trade and supply chain digitalization globally. As part of this journey, ICC just released last week a standards toolkit for cross-border paperless trade, where we map out a range of foundational standards for adoption by all participants in global trade, ranging from country codes, identifier standards, to multimodal bills of lading. These can be adopted by various types of supply chain actors, from importers, exporters, logistic operators, to customs authorities. This toolkit was developed by the Digital Standards Initiative and the World Trade Organization, drawing on extensive stakeholder consultations, including some of the speakers and organizations featured in today's webinar. So without further ado, let us hear from our esteemed speakers who will have more to share with you on what they see as key challenges, opportunities, and trends shaping multimodal supply chains in the digital era. I wish you all a fruitful discussion and an inspiring experience. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar on the digitalization of multimodal supply chains. As we all know, Asia and the Pacific region is a trade hub for various consumer and intermediate goods, accounting for around 40% of world's merchandise trade. While much progress has been made so far in facilitating cross-border trade, key impediments still remain in many parts of the region. These include needs for multiple transshipments due to limited transit rights and the lack of well-coordinated institutional arrangement for transport and trade facilitation at both national and regional levels. Moreover, supply chain networks are becoming more and more complex from the rising number of actors and geographical dimensions, including increasing vulnerability to disruptions. It is needless to say that seamless movement of goods is vital to reducing trade costs. This would require greater connectivity through development of multimodal transport system, which strengthens transport transit and communication links across the region. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the importance of digital trade facilitation and digitalizing multimodal supply chains to keep trade flowing in a seamless manner. In fact, restrictions on movement of people within and across borders have compelled firms to revisit their business models and leverage digital technologies in production and distribution. Consumers are also much more cognizant of the convenience and the safety of digital mode of transactions. The coordination of transport and logistics chains will require the synchronization of many transport and transshipment procedures for various stakeholders. Increased coordination needs, in turn, will require technology solutions to transmit data across different actors to improve tracing and transparency. We should address these many challenges to reap the benefits of digitalized supply chains. A great deal of digital device still remains, and many developing economies have very limited access to digital technologies and solutions, however. Investments in human capital are also imperative to improve skills in the workforces. Last but not least, regulatory barriers remain key challenges that deter many businesses from having access to opportunities for trade and inhibit interoperability of transit and customs procedures across the borders. To get our arms around these challenges, we need to work together, and our concerted efforts for efficient supply chains and inclusive development should continue. So I welcome this very timely webinar, which will lay out all these important issues at hand and explore possible solutions. And I look forward to very productive and insightful discussions. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much from our co-organizers, representatives, for the insightful remarks, which will guide and provide different standing points and perspectives for our further discussion. Now, I would like to introduce our next speaker and moderator, Mr. Kourtney Robinson, a senior official from the International Civil Aviation Organization. Dear Kourtney, the floor is yours, please.
Very good. Thank you for that introduction. And I'm just bringing up my slides. Just one moment. Oh. Sorry, let me try that again. Okay, so hopefully now you see the presentation, yes? Okay, well, thank you very much. As mentioned, I'm Kourtney Robinson, Air Transport Officer for Air Cargo at the International Civil Aviation Organization. I'm going to introduce the panel that we have set up, our first panel for today. But first, I'm going to give just a brief history so that everyone is informed a little bit on ICAO and our history and mandate. So ICAO is the specialized agency for civil aviation, the UN Specialized Agency for Civil Aviation, established upon the Chicago Convention of 1944. And here you have a slide that just details our foundings. And I'll highlight on this slide the two conventions that are of particular relevance to what we'll discuss here today. That is our founding document, the Chicago Convention, and also the Montreal Convention of 1999, which references the air waybill and permits the substitution of that paper waybill by other means of preserving record of carriage. And I'll highlight that we are going to discuss how that can be provided digitally. A little bit about our mission and role. We have some 12,000 provisions, most of those being what we call standards and recommended practices, but also including other levels of provisions such as guidance material, and that is an area that we're going to discuss in particular today. We have as far as guidance for air cargo and how it supports the standards and recommended practices that we ask our states to mandate in their national regulations. And the main theme, I would say, is today going to be collaboration. You heard our Regional Director for Asia Pacific, Mr. Matau, talk about the collaboration that ICAO had with UNECE, and Mario Poslov is going to discuss that as part of the first channel, as part of the first panel. And also he referenced that joint statement, and there's an important quote that highlights the importance that the UN agencies, which for that joint statement included the 5 regional commissions, UNCTAD, which is the UN Conference on Trade and Development, and ICAO, and the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, highlighting the importance of digital trade and our commitment to using that to make sure connectivity, essential connectivity, is provided through the pandemic. And in addition, there are a number of other organizations. I'll mention some of the states that we have worked with. We'll be hearing from the U.S. government, from U.S. Customs and Border Protection, highlighting some collaboration that we have with them and exploring new technologies. So with that, I'm going to prepare to hand off to our first speaker, Mr. Luca Castellani of UNCTAD, which is the UN Conference on Trade and Development. As secretary of their working group 4, which is electronic commerce, he oversaw the preparation of the UNCITRAL Model Law on Electronic Transferable Records, also known as MLETR, the acronym being MLETR, as well as work on the use of cross-border recognition of identity management and trust services. These are all very relevant topics for some of the examples of the emerging technologies that we're going to give over the course of this webinar. So without further ado, let me please call Luca to activate your camera, and we will get your presentation going. Thank you for joining us, Luca.
Thank you, Kourtney. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you also for moderating this panel. I think it's quite late where you're based, so this is particularly appreciated. I believe that I have about 7 minutes for my presentation, so without further ado, let me share the slides and start what I have to do. I will today touch upon 2 issues which are directly relevant for digitization of multimodal supply chain. One is the model law on electronic transfer records, which is a legislative text that UNCITRAL has adopted in 2017, and the other one has to do with the ongoing work. Which may be particularly relevant for our colleagues from Asia, including those from Central Asia. So this is the cover actually of the brochure of the UNCITRAL model on electronic transfer records. The text and the explanatory note are available on the UNCITRAL website in the 6 official languages of the United Nations. This model law aims to fill in a gap in existing legislation. UNCITRAL has prepared a number of legislative texts that enable the use of electronic transactions and electronic signatures. Those texts, they are altogether adopted in more than 100 states. So chances are that your country already has legislation based on UNCITRAL's work. But there was still one missing element, and the missing element had to do with what we call transferable documents or instruments. That is to say, these are commercial documents that incorporate the right to ask for the payment of money or the delivery of goods. What does it mean incorporate? It means that this right is transferred with the transfer of the document itself. Most important here is bill of lading, but also promissory notes and bills of exchange are widely used in trade financing. Now, without having this document in electronic form, we cannot really claim that we can go fully digital in trade facilitation. There have been attempts in the past to address this, but these attempts did not go to the key issue, which is to have this enabled in legislation. They were based on contractual agreements, and the limit in contractual agreements is that they are not opposable to third parties. One has to subscribe the contract, to be bound by the contract. So the model law on electronic transfer records came to address just that. Because it was adopted in 2017, it already takes into account, for instance, the possibility of using DLT and blockchain. It is open to dynamic information coming from oracles, and therefore it is fully compatible with the Internet of Things based supply chain management. And it also takes into account automation in contract, which usually referred to as smart contracts. Already adopted in 7 countries, but most importantly, it has been endorsed by the G7 last year under the British presidency, and this year the German presidency will carry on that work, and the goal is to have all G7 plus jurisdictions, which includes Australia and South Korea, considering the adoption of this model. And there is a dedicated initiative, ICC Digital Standards Initiative, to which the Asian Development Bank is a partner, that has chosen this model law as the legal standard of reference. Main features, this is enabling, that is to say, it removes obstacles to the use in electronic form of these documents, but it does not introduce new regulation, new mandatory requirements, new requirements to comply with. It is technology neutral, like all antitrust texts. This is a key feature in order to promote interoperability. This is really seen as the legal core of an ecosystem that is open, that is competitive, that is based on open standards, and where therefore all the service providers can come and offer their services, and as long as they are able to exchange the information with the other operators. Extremely important because it's based on a principle called the principle of functional equivalence. It does not change in any way what we call the substantive law, that is to say the commercial law that already applies to these documents. The identical law will apply to documents whether they are on paper or electronic. But this one adds what is needed to have the electronic use. This means, as I mentioned before, that unlike previous tentatives to do things, it is still possible to use these documents to deal with third parties, and in particular to use them for financing purposes as a collateral, because it's possible for banks to use these as a guarantee. When, as I mentioned before, it's open to new technologies, new developments. Therefore, it is already fully in line with what we see as the next generation of supply chain management. And it also provides guidance on how to switch from electronic to paper and the other way around. Of course, in business practice, usually this is electronic to paper, and unlikely that it is paper to electronic. So what's the vision here? The vision is, which is being implemented, for instance, in Singapore's Trade Trust, is to have a single electronic record which has all the information relevant for the commercial transaction. The benefit here is that it has best data quality. The data is up-to-date, complete, accurate, and authentic. And based on that, we can even implement the concept of data pipeline, because all clients can go and selectively get the information they're entitled to from this single record. Of course, if we have one single record, we improve greatly governance because we have best data quality, but we also reduce issues with errors and inconsistencies, because by definition, data is consistent across the supply chain. We have also looked at what this means in terms of post-pandemic economic recovery, and we have seen several benefits. Of course, some of them are obvious. If we can go paperless, we have less personal interaction. Some of them are well known, like for instance, if this is implemented with blockchain, we can provide a higher level of assurance about the traceability of the product. Extremely important for medical products. And others have to do more with the general issues, like the ability to have control over the logistics and customs supply chain. If it's fully digital, of course, it gives us the possibility to prioritize humanitarian shipments and so on and so forth, and especially to have full real-time tracking. So we don't have black holes that we don't know what's happening to things. And last but not least, if we reduce compliance costs and we make compliance easier, and we also have a possibility to have a better visibility of all the assets of a company, we may be able to give more affordable and easier and faster access to credit to micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. Now, mindful of time, and to finish, I would like to mention the ongoing project in the Secretariat. Ongoing project that is now in the exploratory phase or preparatory phase. It will be submitted to the Commission, the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, at its session in July. The issue here is that currently the only transport documents that are transferable and negotiable are bills of lading, which involve a maritime law segment. Because they are transferable and negotiable, they can be used as a collateral for financing. But the other documents, including straight bills of lading, that are not negotiable, cannot be used as such. Basically, because banks cannot use the goods as a security for the money that they're lending. So this has been because for a long time there was only the carriage of goods by sea was actually the one that took time and that justified the use of goods as collateral. But now there are new business practices, and namely with the carriage of goods by rail. So China made a proposal to UNESCAP to develop this a new transport document, which is negotiable, but that does not involve maritime lag. There has been some exploratory work, significant exploratory work, and the idea here is not to affect existing liability regimes. This is, of course, a very complex area, and UNESCAP has done work on it too, namely with respect to carriage of goods by sea. Not to affect existing transport documents, but to come on top of existing transport documents. And of course, these non-maritime transport document negotiable. It will be medium neutral, so it can be issued both electronically and on paper. And the electronic part is based on the model on electronic transfer records. Of course, it's up to the Commission to decide the next phase, but at the same time, it is expected that the Commission will authorize work at the working group level as soon as a working group is available. And therefore, based on that, I would like to invite everyone here to follow the developments, and of course the government officials may be interested. All governments are invited to participate in UNESCAP. So those who are interested in multimodal transport may wish to have active participation in this. My apologies if I went a little bit over time. I tried to do as quick as possible. Kourtney, I give back the floor to you.
Very good. That was an exceptional introduction to an important foundation for digitalization as far as legal framework. So thanks to the UN Commission on International Trade Law for undertaking this work and joining us today. And we look forward to having you in the Q&A, which I will point out to everyone will be at the end after the second panel. So please do stay tuned. So next, we will have Mr. Manoj Singh from the Mumbai International Airport join us. That perspective that he'll offer is important because airports are where much of this technology will come together. It is where the cargo carriers are, where the freight forwarders converge, and we have the cargo terminals. And some airports have multimodal terminals. That is an increasing feature. So as that is where the user is, we can appreciate the perspective that he will bring from that airport, from Mumbai Airport, which is a fast-growing air cargo hub globally. Mr. Singh, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, ICAO, ICC, ESCAP for a wonderful sessions which has been organized by everyone. And congratulations to entire colleagues from the industry who are part of this process. To begin with, I do not have any presentation as such, but I would definitely like to emphasize and speak about how Mumbai Airport has grown on the digitization initiative, which they have worked together as a team with all the stakeholders. A success story I would speak about. And also Government of India recently moving into a very unified unit program, which basically is going to be a game changer for the entire supply chain within the country and also across the globe in the competitive market. So to begin with, when I talk about the airport is an ecosystem where all the collaboration is much needed. And that's where, from the airport perspective, what we have done is we have collaborated all the stakeholders together way back in 2014, where, the stakeholders collaborations clearly defined the process of supply chain of each stakeholder's responsibility. And based on that, we made the very first in the world, I would say, a very comprehensive airport community system, which really been the game changer in the entire dwell time, and the process management change happened in terms of entire cargo being processed at the airport. Worldly, what we have seen is investments on the IT sectors, especially on the digitizations, have been very, very limited. I would say the world, when we do a survey, we have seen around not more than 5 to 6% of investments have been done, either by the company or either by the entire ecosystem of the aviation industry. But when last 3 years, what we can see is there has been a complete new transformation. The COVID has given a big message to all of us that many things can happen through the digitizations, and we have taken that opportunity at Mumbai Airport to collaborate together and launched a few more products, which may been again a game changer. We recently launched a process called digital docket delivery through our channel partner. That really made the process of the entire supply chain, especially on the import cargo, on a complete mobile clearance, where we eliminated almost around 20 million, we expect around 20 million copies of papers will be eliminated. So that's where from a process of a complete manual process to a complete digital mode, and that process has really helped us into clearly transforming the entire supply chain at the airport level. What we are trying to further emphasize is we also have connected to the shippers. As an airport, digital corridor was something which airport to airport within the region, at the Europe level, at the US level, we are trying to connect with airports. The modules of our cargo community systems and the ground handling applications which we are trying to process is being set as a benchmark to many other airports in the world, and that really gives us a clarity where we try to undertake many workshops and POCs along with our shippers. We have connected with top 5 companies in the world on a shippers platform where the airport connects with the shippers, so that their KPIs are monitored, and every process of the supply chain players are monitored in terms of how the process will be defined. In case of there is deviation, we really focus. So looking from the airport perspective, I think very, very important is every supply chain players have a very important role. Now coming to the Government of India's role, what they're trying to see is they are also connecting every stakeholders, be it on the Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Relations, where airport community system is at one glance, but also message exchanging with the regulators, single window systems, many transformations have come. So overall, when we talk about digitization process in India, the airports are really doing huge investments, connecting all stakeholders. Time formation is happening, and we can see the value benefits. Not only they are becoming the compliance perspective connecting to the world, but also they have been business enablers also. So digitization keeps on giving a lot of initiatives as well, and trying to give more value added to the customers. You give solution to customers, you give solutions to your stakeholders. I think you are there as an airport to play a very important role. And that's where we as an airport, Mumbai Airport has really seen huge transformations and created a physical capacity challenges into an opportunity where the process has been very seamless. So overall, I would say when we talk about the aviation sector, when we talk about passengers are very well monitored and every process is being mapped. But when we talk about cargo, again, there is a huge transformations happening all across the globe. And I think digitization is the most important success story, and it needs to be enhanced. And all the regulators have come into a digital platform. So all I would say that the collaboration is much needed, and the ownership of each stakeholder is very important. And I'm sure this really will make a huge changes. Thank you, Kourtney.
Thank you for your very succinct presentation of this information. I appreciate particularly you highlighting that success is already happening. Digitalization is something that can happen quite quickly. In infrastructure, we're very used to things taking 5 years, 10 years, and more. But with digitalization, you can yield results quickly. And also, I think it's important that you highlighted the role of governments. Governments are key partners. In addition to industry having the will, the government have to be actively engaged. And that's something that we can discuss later, and we'll see with one of our upcoming speakers. So next, we're going to go to see a more clear example. Our next speaker is Mario Apostolov of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, where he is a regional advisor focusing in these economic affairs. His area of focus is Central Asia, but the multimodal transport reference data model that he's going to speak about is a product of the UN Center for Trade Facilitation and Electronic Business, which has a more global remit. And so Mario has been working with this subsidiary of UNECE to unlock the potential of the MMT RDM, we call it, in COVID times through a special project that I mentioned earlier, and also that Mr. Tao Ma mentioned. So Mario, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me and you can see my presentation.
Very well.
Thank you very much, Kourtney. And thank you for presenting me. So I'm moving straight into the first slide, which you already started presenting. UNEC, the UN Economic Commission for Europe, is one of the 5 regional commissions in the UN, together with our sister organization, ESCAP. It is like ESCAP under the ECOSOC umbrella. And it has some subsidiary bodies, including the UN Center for Trade Facilitation and Electronic Business, UNCFACT, which has a global remit for such things as trade facilitation standards, semantic standards for information exchange, and also it is developing currently reference data models as the new generation of information exchange standards for the digital age. The previous generation, which I will mention in my presentation, was EDIFACT, which was developed in the 1990s as the only global standard for electronic data interchange. And now the idea is to move to new tools for the internet era. Kourtney, thank you for presenting me that I work on Central Asia, but Central Asia is one of the common areas between UNEC and ESCAP. Also, the South Caucasus is a common area. North Asia, we have members, and ESCAP has the same members. So it's an overlapping area in which we are happy to collaborate. What I am going to speak now is known to some of you, but I will underline it again. There is a joint UN Development Account project of all the 5 regional commissions and UNCTAD. And under that project, UNEC had several areas of work. One of them is particularly important for this discussion now, and it is in one of the windows on the overall website of that project, the electronic trade and transport documents and data exchange. So under that project, and you can find the results, including both standards and artifacts, and also reports of pilot projects. We aimed at creating a package of standards and artifacts, which means data subsets of the UNCFACT reference data models, also schemas and data structures, so that implementers of digitalization of data and document exchange in multimodal transport can use them. So by now, the last 1.5 years, we completed, like the experts of CFACT and other UNEC experts completed the package of standards for the key documents accompanying goods transported by the 5 main modes of transport. maritime, road, inland water, rail, and air. And here I want to stress that even if here it's marked that the draft standards are developed, they are already approved like 6 months ago, and they are published on both this website and the UNCFACT website. The chair of CFACT will speak later, Ms. Sue Probert, and she will explain more in detail what is meant by those standards. If you want to see what is published, like these standards and artifacts and the reports of the pilot projects by now, you can find the information on this particular URL link, which leads you to the small segment of the website which I'm mentioning here. What this slide shows the concept of all the work. We are talking here about interoperability. This is the buzzword. We are not talking about new standards for example, the airway bill. IATA has created that. And the point is to create the link with the other modes of transport. So for that reason, we are looking at the operational data, meaning the data that is exchanged with the other modes of transport. Imagine goods coming by air to, let's say, Baku, and then taken by ship to be moved across the Caspian, or by rail to the neighboring countries, or by truck to the neighboring countries. That's the point. The operational data can be, if it is aligned to the international UN standards, UNCFACT standards, the multimodal transport reference data model of UNCFACT, that creates the possibility of seamless exchange among the various modes of transport. And this is what is interesting for all the key players in this whole story. The for railway organizations and operators, for air, that is the interesting thing. Create the interoperability with the other modes of transport. And if the data is aligned to the global UN standards, reference data models, then it can be linked to other sectors of the supply chain, including it can be, if it is standardized, the data can be fed into the regulatory process in the customs and other regulatory agencies' systems. So this slide is just an explanation of what I'm talking in slightly more technical terms. One of the documents, and we are talking here about the key documents like the consignment notes and the bills of lading. So the idea is that if the data is aligned to the multimodal transport reference data model, the core components library of UNCFACT, then it can be exchanged between the different modes of transport and with the different sectors. It's not only limited to transport, but we are talking here about the idea of multimodal exchange. So here I'm showing one slide which is focusing on rail, but Monsieur Probert will show a similar slide for air cargo. So here I'm just showing what we are working right now on converters between the different documents, which like the different consignment nodes and the different technologies. Like on the very right hand side, I took a snapshot of the EDIFACT list of data in the EDIFACT message called IFTMIN, which covers the railway consignment node. And then on the other slides, you can see different documents of the different regimes that are used in the European and broader Eurasian space. The SMGS consignment node, which is managed by one of the railway organizations, the CIM, SMGS consignment node, etc. So that also creates the possibility to linking the data to the other documents, including the dangerous goods declarations, and this is exactly what we have done for air. So we, I believe, Sue Probert will talk about that. And this is my last slide. The idea was that we boost the development of standards against the background of the global pandemic, so that data could pass seamlessly from one mode of transport to another mode of transport, from one document to another. And we boosted the development of the standards, the supporting tools, artifacts, the data sets, subsets, the schemas, the data structures, but also we tried to check that in practice in pilot implementation projects. And as the first standards were for land-based standards and documents, the idea was to try to explore in the concept in pilot projects along land. There were tests, concrete tests, which were combining maritime, inland water, road and rail transport. You can see here a schematic presentation of a real case test. Unfortunately, if you check the names of the cities and places, you can see that there is a lot of trouble in this particular area. But never mind, the tests were done. And also this slide shows that the information, the data was used in different modes of transport for the same consignment being transported. And our objective, together with ICAO and other partners, is to try to include the air transport, the air cargo standards and documents in other pilot projects. Okay, the standards are developed, but the proof of the cake is in the eating. So others are very much invited to use them. The publication of the many of the standards is ready. They were cited in this recent document by ICC. The air cargo documents, meaning standards on the operational data for the IATA, for the airway bill, also the dangerous goods declaration and the consignment security declaration are ready. And the idea is to work on them further. Thank you very much for the attention.
And thank you, Mario, for the presentation. And on that note, I will end by highlighting the importance of that map that you had just displayed, that graphic. With the addition of air, we have an opportunity to expand this through pilot implementation. And Mario mentioned some of the other concerns that are ongoing in one region in particular. The focus that we have seen on the supply chain in COVID-19 times has really prioritized developments like what Mario just highlighted. In fact, the addition of air to the multimodal transport reference data model is a direct result of the pandemic. So it is now is the ideal time to leverage that investment and use this to build back better, as was mentioned before, in the supply chain, adding with the addition of air cargo, and also taking the opportunity to really expand the use of these new deliverables. So next, we're going to look at another fast emerging development, which is the area of the verified credentials. Our next speaker is Mr. Vincent Annunziato with the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, the Office of Business Transformation and Innovation Division, which he leads as director. So Mr. Annunziato, he's had the opportunity to lead many high-profile projects, notable success being the U.S.'s single window environment, also cargo release and the free and secure trade, also known as the FAST program. So Vinny's going to tell us a bit more about what he's doing in the area of verifiable credentials, which include blockchain systems and other technologies. Vincent, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Kourtney. And it's always wonderful to be in front of the international community. I was recently talking with the Asian Pacific Economics Co-op. Also was with the WCO of the Americas and the Africas, talking just about this subject and talking about U.S. investments into new technology. So if we can move to the first slide, that would be great. I want to start off a little bit with an anecdotal description of what customs does. And I think it's important for this day and age, especially in the e-commerce world. When I was watching a documentary, must have been about 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago. I'm sorry, I get my time a little confused, but I was watching this documentary and they were talking about what was called, this young lady who was called an internet influencer. And she couldn't have been much more than 16, 17 years old. If I were to see her on the street, I wouldn't think much of what was going on other than I saw an average teenager. And apparently she has 1.5 million followers. And of course, when she says something should be purchased, she has a group of young ladies, because it's based on cosmetics, that follow her, every move. And another young lady about the same age that was on this documentary saw that this lipstick was something that she had to get. And ultimately, when she purchased the lipstick, she got the cheapest that she could find on the internet. And when she applied it, found that her lips had been sealed with super glue. And the reason that I state something like this is because customs organizations have a very difficult task. It's not just stopping the big terrorist type things that we have to, that we're all worried about, but it's also keeping our communities safe from products such as those that I just mentioned, lead poisoning in toys. Obviously, people just doing nefarious activity to make money and also to harm others. And that job sometimes is very difficult. So how do we take a world that's got a 180-degree view of looking through millions and millions of products and knocking it down to something that's more manageable so that we can focus on the bad guys and let the good folks facilitate? Now, what happened, now Kourtney gave you some of my background. By trade, I'm a business architect. So I sit with end users and design systems and then communicate that to our more technical folks. So with all this experience, I'm highly pessimistic when somebody says that a technology can do something. I want to see it to believe it. And remember, if you're thinking about innovation in and of itself is really about the art of change. But within that art of change, we don't just do something to do it. We've got to do it because we gain an efficiency. And that efficiency can come in many different forms, usually in cost savings or time savings. So when I first came on with blockchain back in 2017, and we did a couple of pilots in 2018, we had been promised that it could solve world peace, it could solve world hunger. It was doing all these tremendous things. And I didn't want to just jump on board and accept that. So we had to get through the hype of all of what blockchain said and really get down to the practicality. And in doing so, our experiments, we were actually, I believe, first in the world to have blockchain-to-blockchain communication in the first project that we did. But in the second project, where we experimented with intellectual property rights, we were the first definitely in the world to make multiple blockchains communicate in a way that it acted as one blockchain. And that was something that is very difficult to do. So you're hearing the term interoperability being thrown around because it's big. everybody wants to do it. But when I talk about interoperability, for those of you on the business side who don't fully understand it, I'm not talking about open source where you can put something on any type of system, whether it's Linux or an Apple computer or an IBM computer, whatever's running around in the background. I'm talking about interoperability, meaning the seamless exchange of data between softwares. And I think this is the most important thing that I'm going to talk to you about today because of what it actually infers. So we're going to move to the next slide. Now, when we experimented with blockchain, the US government isn't going to promote blockchain as a sole technology solution. And I think now the world is starting to mature and understand that, because there are certain limitations that I won't have too much time to get into that have to be looked at. But the biggest thing from a government perspective is, do I really need a consensus algorithm? Or do I really want to leave the data out there almost on an indefinite basis? And those questions have to be really looked at. Now, we're not against blockchain. We look at blockchain as one source of technology that can be usable. Now, we moved into these standards that you're seeing here on the screen. And by the way, the one all the way to the right has changed names so many times that I'm just leaving it, because every time I memorize it, it goes to something else. We called it encrypted vault, and then there was something, another name that just came up. But if you look at the first two, these are with the W3C. And I believe in another session, or Luke with Matter, he's going to be talking about this more technically than I am. But the penultimate of what we've got here is we've got an identification system that is uniquely identified with a public-private pairing, so that if I show up on a network with Kourtney on network A, and then I'm on network M, he can always know it's me, but he can't steal my identity because I have a private key. Now, you mix that with the power of verifiable credentials, and you start talking about an automated way to get back to a source that can verify a new word that I'm going to introduce to you, over truth, because that's been beaten to death. But I'm going to talk about something called legitimacy. US Customs is ultimately interested in legitimizing person, products, and obviously companies. And we can do that through what's called an attestation. So in an example of a passport or a driver's license, for instance, if I give you my passport or my driver's license and you look at it, there's one thing missing by looking at that physical identity. You could look at me and see that I'm the person in the picture, but you don't know whether or not it's true. But what if I can give you something digital that actually gets me back to the source of the issuer, so the passport office or the DMV that would have given you that license, and then actually know that I match the attributes, and electronically I know that this is an active document. And that's what becomes important. You can go to the next slide. When you start talking about these types of standards, and you can see right here on this slide the amount of investment that we're making. We have 5 projects coming up. And this doesn't mention that we're doing a full, well, it does mention, but we're moving into a full modernization effort in 2025, and all of these are progressing. But when you really start to think about what these standards can do, and what we want to do in the government, is we really want to build what's called a digital twin. And that digital twin is a digital representation of the physical world. We want to know the who, the what, and the where. What is it? Who is in charge of it? And where is it geographically located? The concept behind the community standards is also, I think, a very healthy approach, because it allows all different types of technology to be utilized with it. It doesn't necessarily have to be blockchain or distributed ledger technology. It could be any technology. And in doing so, we're able to start to get into things like getting data in near real time. We're able to see all of the actors in the supply chain, something that we haven't been able to do in the past. So no more stovepiping. And ultimately, I have very little time, and to knock this a 35 to 40 minute presentation down to 10 minutes is very difficult. But ultimately, the world can become a better, safer, more productive place using community-oriented standards where no one country benefits over another. And I think ultimately this is the healthiest approach, and we're starting to get joined internationally with other countries and governments, and certainly the private sector. I look forward to working with all of you. We've been working with ICAO especially, and Kourtney, thank you so much for the time. It is great to be here today.
Superb, Vinny. Thank you so much for setting the stage, and really to many people in the audience introducing this, their first time seeing what you've been developing. One thing that I'll point out that was really helpful was your use of the term digital twin, something that I've heard Mario mention in the context of the UNECE work and our collaboration there a number of times. So it is good to see this consistency across two independent projects, completely independent from each other, but with the same goal. I think that is important that we recognize, and should give us a confidence that we are driving towards alignment. We are converging. And I'll also point out that I'm joining you from San Francisco, where I'm a speaker at the International Air Cargo Association's Executive Summit, TIACA being an industry association that is perhaps the key associated when it comes to air cargo stakeholders and their engagement at ICAO, representing their interests from an industry perspective. And there is much interest here. We just finished the first day. It's about 2 in the morning here. Digitalization is all over the agenda, both streams, aspects of digitalization, artificial intelligence, and this location was chosen because there's going to be a Silicon Valley component later in the week. So just to let you all know that it is a top priority these days. So the work that you're all doing is particularly exciting and welcome and needed. So that concludes panel 1. We're going to have questions later. That'll give folks like you, Vinny, more time to expound a little bit on what you've said as people ask specific questions. And I will hand over to my colleague and our other moderator, Florence.
Thank you, Kourtney.
For the second panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Kourtney. And thanks for your dedication, getting up at 2 in the morning. So greetings from the ICC from Paris, and welcome to the second part of this webinar, in which we will hear a bit more about the implementation of the great work and standards that we have heard just before. But first, I would like to thank the co-organizers for bringing us all together today, and also to all of you for being with us. So about me, I'm Florence Binta Diao-Gay, and I work as a policy manager at the International Chamber of Commerce in Paris. And for those of you who don't know the ICC, we are a global business organization, the institutional representative of more than 45 million companies across all sectors and industries from all over the world. So we have MSMEs, we have also macro companies in our network. And we are also the only business organization that has a permanent observer status at the United Nations. And for this part of the webinar, you will hear from 3 esteemed speakers who are directly working on the digitalization of supply chains. So I'm very delighted to have all of you with us, and to start this second part with Ms. Sue Probert as the first speaker. She has more than 50 years experience working in the computer industry, and for the last 3 decades, she has focused her work on paper and electronic documentation production requirements. And currently she is the chair of the UNESCAP, the Center for Trade Facilitation and E-Business. As we have heard, is the subsidiary body of UNECA, Committee on Trade. And as a keen advocate for trade facilitation, we will hear a bit more about some of the challenges and how they will resolve it with their data models that are very crucial, I think, for the digitalization. So over to you, Sue.
Thank you very much, Florence. Just trying to organize my screen here, which seems to have moved around and got rather small. Let's see if I can make it bigger. Okay. Hello, everybody, whatever time of day it is with you. I'd like to share my presentation. So let's see if I can manage this. Okay. Okay, so how do I move the screen? I have to change the screen, don't I? Okay, so this is not my first slide. It keeps going to the second slide. So yes, as I've been well introduced already, thank you very much, Florence, and thank you for the introduction, also Mario in the first panel. I'd like to talk here about the sometimes dry subject of the importance of semantics and understanding semantics across industries and modes of transport, and the work that we've done to support the recent press releases and support for the multimodal transport reference data model. So without ado, we have a very short time. So just to introduce UNESCAP deliverables, I'd like to make sure we say at the beginning, we're a volunteer organization. We have more than 1,000 experts that contribute and have contributed over the last 30 years to our work. And they come from the business sector, the trade sector, the transport sector, and the regulatory sector. Between us, we have published over the years nearly 50 international trade facilitation recommendations, which is the highest level of our deliverables. We also, and I'm going to concentrate on the next section, 2 sections, which is the international agreed e-business standards for electronic business and the common libraries, common directories, and very importantly, we manage, maintain and publish over 180 international code lists, which are really critical to interoperability. Our work within the reference data model semantic work that we do reflects the whole of the global supply chain. We look at the whole holistic view because it's really important to take into account for international trade contracts, the transport aspects and the regulatory aspects, because both of those bring in regulations and controls that we need to be aware of within the business-to-business data exchanges within the international supply chain. So we look at the whole view, we cover the procedures from beginning to end, and now we are even looking at sustainability before and after the sales contract itself internationally, which becomes and has become and is a very important part of all the work we're looking at these days. So we have semantics, we're building the semantics to cover those aspects as well, certification and so on. Okay, so our reference data models start at the top of the tree with one that we've called for nearly 20 years now, the buy, ship, pay reference data model. This is not a model expressed in any exchange syntax. It's not XML, it's not JSON, it's not EDIFACT, it's something higher. It describes the semantics of the data that needs to be exchanged to cover the global supply chain. And we have 3 very, very important views, which are reference data model views on the global supply chain. The one on the left is the trade view. So this is between buyers and sellers and everything they exchange in order to conduct trade contracts internationally, cross borders. The middle one is the aspect of the movement of the goods. This is the transport data. It considers transport contracts and operations, which are necessary for moving the goods. And of course, we know that there are regulatory requirements for different modes, and I'll come to that in a moment. Why we think we've achieved something positive towards multimodal data exchange. Last but not least, on the right-hand side, there is the view that we're working on at the moment in a project called the Cross-Border Management Reference Data Model. And this is looking to identify within the global supply chain the data that is required for cross-border management. So we're talking here of customs and other agencies and the clearance of goods between borders, because we recognize that at least 2 borders have to be crossed to conduct international trade, and often it's many others. So as just to highlight again, we are cross-industry, we're multimodal. Our work is based on the contribution of well over 1,000 very experienced experts over a period of the last 30+ years. Some of them have stayed the whole time, like me and others that have worked since the very beginning of UNEDIFACT, but also, and the layout key for paper. But we also have people who have come and gone and stayed with us a long time. We have some people on the call today on this webinar who have been working with UNCFACT for a long time, including one of the vice chairs of the UNCFACT Bureau. These experts have been able to put their expertise from their different areas together to form to understand first of all, the procedures involved in global supply chains. It's very important that all our modeling is supported by what we call business requirement specifications, which define the processes that are involved. And once we have these data models, we're able to obviously share them as we are today and hope that people will reuse them. But we're also using them internally to develop new implementations of modern technologies. We're looking at JSON and APIs right now, and also things like incorporating data from smart devices on maritime containers, etc. But very important, and I want to highlight this very strongly, if you're going to try and describe the semantics of the global supply chain, and I think there was a question in the chat from a very old friend of mine, Mr. Greg Pilkington, which touches on this. It's absolutely critical that you understand the meanings of the words to use in a common way. And what we have done in UNCFACT is we have a business requirement specification for the global supply chain, which sets up semantic anchors such as the difference between a trade delivery, also called the shipment, which is between the buyer and the seller about how they're going to move the goods that have been bought under the sales contract, and then the consignment, which is the evidence of a transport contract, which is moving the goods from seller to buyer and may have more levels of consignments, such as house consignments and master consignments. But we use these words very, very definitely and follow these definitions here that you see, and we have many others as well. So there's a lot of semantic definitions that are behind our work. Mario has already introduced the UNTTC project, and UNCFACT has been pleased to contribute to this particular project. And we always have our projects supported by as many heads of delegations as wish to. And this one was supported by the 7 that you see here. And we had all of our transport experts working on these projects to come up with the standards that we have published on the 2 websites. As Mario said, we've looked at we've had expert panels, not only from these individual transport modes, but also involving other experts, so that we can really look at what data needs to go between maritime at a port and the movement of a container onto a rail wagon or onto a truck or onto a barge or whatever is needed for the onward transport movement. Because each of the modes of transport have a strong regulatory basis for international movements, there is a difference between the semantics that are used within those modes. What we are doing is using our multimodal framework to break those barriers down and to have standards that define one piece of data in the same way that can be understood across all the modes and will help operationally data exchanges and the understanding of data that goes with the accompanying the goods as they move from mode to mode. So very quickly now, I know I haven't got much time, but this is just an example of the maritime. It's the Ocean Bill of Lading, and I'd like to say here that there is a lot of initiatives at the moment around the EBL, and I'd like to confirm that FIATA, who will be speaking shortly, also the DCSA and the FIT alliances from the carriers and forwarders, plus FIAT, plus BIMCO and BIMCO, ship owners and IMO, plus the ICC and WTO standards framework are all reusing the MMT Ocean Bill of Lading as the basis for the BL, which means that we can concentrate on other things rather than just the semantics that we need for the transport contract. That's our contribution to transport data. Okay, so here's the ECMR, which is the road convention, and here we have also got a UN CFAC standard for expressing the data as required by the ECMR for road. We have rail. We're doing a lot of work within rail because rail already has more than one transport convention, and we can use our standards to help to bring those together, as well as moving from the classic mode to mode. And then we have the air work that Mario introduced, the 3 air aspects of the air data that we've been looking at, and we've been harmonizing the data from these three core documents in air to the multimodal framework, expressing the common data elements between them and also mapping them to do the WC to the MMT. And this is what we produce. We can produce matrices that compare all the different modes and the different documents, traditional data exchanges, and we can see where in MMT they're using common data. And we can use these matrices to experiment further to encourage more harmonization between the modes in the way they use the data and how it links. So that's we're all now looking at dangerous goods and harmonizing across the regulations, which also vary from mode to mode, as I'm sure you all know. And we're working in conjunction with the UNEC Transport Division, IMO FAL, ICAO, and the EU DG Move FD regulation development to harmonize the semantics to enable easier definition of dangerous goods or reporting of dangerous goods across the modes. And these are who we collaborate. We have a very strong collaborative program with our UN sister organizations, with regional organizations, and with international and private standards organizations. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that's a bit rushed, but this is where you can find out more. And I appreciate very much being invited to speak, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sue, and very impressive what you're working on. And I think, you know, that ICC publishing the Incoterms, we really understand also the importance of having the same understanding of the terms. It's really the basis, actually, to advance.
Absolutely. Thank you, Florence. It's very important.
Yeah. So now I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Keshav Tanna. He's an experienced logistics professional who has more than 30 years experience in the air freight forwarding industry. He's the founder of Links International, a logistics company, and he's been the past president of the Air Cargo Agents Association of India. He's also a member of India in the Federation of Asia Pacific Air Cargo Associations. So you can see he's very much involved in air cargo matters for the Asian Pacific region. And today we have him as a speaker as one important member of FIATA, the International Federation of Freight Forwarders Associations. And he will tell us a bit more about the efforts in digitizing bills of lading. And so I'm very thrilled to have him among our speakers, and I very much look forward to hearing about your initiative. So the floor is yours, Mr. Tanna.
Thank you, Florence, for that very nice introduction. It is a pleasure to speak to you on this interesting topic, which all of you would agree has become even more relevant in the last 2 years of the pandemic. A little bit of an introduction of FIATA and who we are. FIATA, or the International Federation of Freight Forwarders Associations, is a non-governmental membership-based organization representing freight forwarders in some 150 odd countries. We have 111 association members and roughly 5,500 individual members, overall representing 40,000 freight forwarding and logistics companies around the world. As an industry association, it would be part of our key mission to unite, represent, promote, and protect the freight forwarding industry, and also to standardize and improve the quality of services rendered by freight forwarders across different modes of transport. One of the most notable examples of FIATA's work on standardization is the creation of the 8 standard documents to harmonize the forms, different forms used by freight forwarders. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So these standard documents were created decades ago, and they include, could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. These standard documents were created some decades ago, and they include the non-negotiable FIATA multimodal transport waybill, or the FWB, the FIATA forwarder certificate, or the FCR, the forwarder's warehouse receipt, or the FWR, and the most popular being the FBL, the negotiable FIATA multimodal transport bill of lading. This document is in conformity with the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development and the International Chamber of Commerce rules for multimodal transport documentation. Now, all these documents were only available in paper format thus far, but with a strong demand from our members, we have decided to digitize them, starting first with the FBL. So, digitized documents, we have decided to base ourselves on already existing and widely used standards, since in the digital world, it is crucial to speak the same language and to be able to exchange the information seamlessly. The UNESCAP multimodal transport reference data model is already widely used within the industry, and this is why we have decided to base our EFBL, or the Electronic Forwarders Bill of Lading, data standard on the same. This would facilitate the interoperability with all existing standards and platforms. We welcome the fact that other organizations such as ICAO have decided to create new standards also based on the UNESCAP reference data model, as this will help to facilitate the interoperability of air freight with other modes of transport. The EFBL data standard was developed thanks to a collaboration with FIATA members and UNESCAP experts. FIATA and the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, or the UNEC, proudly announced the official release of the electronic FIATA multimodal bill of lading recently. It is already available for all industry stakeholders and software providers to implement. You can access it freely through FIATA's GIT Hub repository, and the data standard is offered as an open source for all industry stakeholders. This standard, together with related service we have developed, which I will explain in my next slide, were tested through a 6-month proof of concept last year. This allowed to confirm both the technical and operational feasibility of our solution. 3 more FIATA standard documents are in the process of being mapped with UNESCAP, and respective data standards are expected to be released by the end of the second quarter 2022, namely the FWB, the FCR, and the FWR, which I just mentioned earlier. FIATA is open to other propositions of proof of concept. As an example of interesting concept to test related to air freight would be to test the acceptance of the FIATA EFBL to automatically populate the e-airway bill, thus avoiding the duplication of data and possible errors. Based on the EFPL data standard, FIATA has also developed a service that will allow freight forwarders to issue paperless FBLs through their everyday tools, transport management systems, and other platforms. This is a practical solution that will allow freight forwarders to choose in which format they wish to share the BL with their stakeholders as PDF, or they can decide if they want to print it, if at all. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Even more than simply providing a digital version, the document the solution will add an extra layer of security, which is really important, and trust, as each document will be registered on an immutable ledger, protecting it from fraud attempts. Each document will also have a unique tracking or a QR code and a QR code. By scanning this QR code or uploading the document on FIATA's verification page, all stakeholders would be able to access the document audit trail, and which will certify that the document was indeed registered by FIATA, display some information about the document issuer, and provide a preview of how the document looked like when it was registered by FIATA. So I think that comes to the end of my presentation, and with that, I thank you all for your patient hearing, and thank you, Florence, for your assistance with the slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tanna, and thanks very much for this great presentation. And I think it's really good that we took a closer look at one of the documents to be digitized, because when we think about the presentation from the first session from Luca, it's just we were talking about the framework, and this is really necessary for all of these digitalization efforts to work, because if the framework isn't in place, we can't really use them. But yeah, so I think it was really great to follow up on this part. So now let's go to our next speaker, Mr. Luke McIntyre, who's Chief Product Officer at Matter, basically bringing their product portfolio to life. So Matter is a technology company, and I'm very pleased to have you with us today, because basically you're one of the companies who is bringing all the ideas and standards we have to the real world. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Florence. I'm just going to share my screen. So you guys should be able to see that in a second. Is that coming up for everybody? It says it's sharing, so I'll assume it is. Cool. So my name is Luke McIntyre, as Florence said. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Matter. We're an organisation based in New Zealand, in Auckland. We work globally, but we are based here in New Zealand. Matter is a standards-based organisation, so we are deeply involved in a lot of the standards that have been talked about today, particularly the ones that Vinny talked about, the DID standard and also the verifiable credential standard being standardised over at W3C. We also see, how these standards show up in the real world, as Florence was mentioning. So how are they implemented across different use cases? How do the kind of theory elements that exist in behind some of these standardization processes actually play out in real world implementations? So we work very closely with these standards bodies, so particularly W3C, other bodies like OpenID Connect, Decentralized Identity Foundation, to help define those standards. And we have had a number of different projects go through standardization processes in those organizations too. So we kind of know a thing or two about the standards. So when we think about standards, really what they facilitate is, as Vinny was talking about in his presentation, is interop. And that's kind of the golden word, I guess, in the space when you're talking about the scale of parties involved in these interactions. So when you're talking about scale at the level of an air cargo ecosystem, multimodal especially, you've got all sorts of considerations throughout all those supply chains in different modes and different parties. And W3C verifiable credentials are an abstract data standard that allow you to flexibly and interoperably define the data with semantics, as Sue was mentioning, into a standard that can be understood across an ecosystem. So when we think about credentials, we think about them as sort of these packages of verifiable data that can be used across different ecosystems, whether it's for a person asserting something about themselves, an organization making an assertion that needs to be trusted, or even a thing. So it's very flexible in the way that the standard can be used, and it provides sort of that abstraction at a data model level. DIDs are about distributed trust from an identifier perspective. So that's really architecturally one of the big differences here in this space, is that decentralized identity, the standards are all about enabling that kind of highly scalable decentralized approach. So when you've got many parties across many different parts of the ecosystem, you really need to think about how you can scale that properly. And the scale that decentralized architectures provide is sort of where the DID standard was starting to be used and born across some of the blockchain projects as well. So you can anchor DIDs into blockchains, you can anchor them into web domains. They're very distributed in the way that they work and are resolved. So as it says there in the second bullet point, it's about scale, it's about using different vendors that can resolve DIDs and verifiable credentials across these ecosystems without needing to create complex integrations and do all of the federation work that might have been required in some of the older models that weren't so decentralized. These standards are also the basis for interoperable conformance. So we do, as a standards organization matter, we do a lot of interop plugfest, and we're doing that as part of our SVIP interop plugfest program that we've participated in a number of times. And this is some imagery, as you can see on the bottom there, from the plugfest last year in terms of the types of things that we tested across 7 different vendors. So when we talk about the digitization of trade, we talk about this idea of verifiable data supply chains. So each stakeholder in a given use case obviously has requirements for the assurances and confidences that they need in the data that they receive. And that's another thing that the verifiable credential standard helps define, is how those assurances can be expressed and how they can be trusted across boundaries. So as the credential, the JSON object that is the W3C credential is exchanged across these boundaries with the digital signatures associated, it also needs that assurance and authenticity information associated as well, so that it can be used by these different parties in the ecosystem with a level of confidence. And so in the semantic context as well, as we've, as Sue sort of alluded to, it's really important that these credentials carry the context with them. So resolvable, what we call vocabs, that are publicly available and can be resolved by any relying party, is sort of the root of the semantic interop. And the W3C standards, the particular variant that we're working on, uses a thing called JSON LD, which is about linked data and linking data together in different vocabs. So it's a really powerful tool for ensuring that the semantic clarity and meaning is carried across these data silo boundaries. And there's actually a bunch of work that we've done in the W3C CCG, Credentials Community Working Group, to define some of those specific vocabs. So you can go there and you can actually look at, there's several vocabs that are already defined for this space in terms of vocabs that can be used with the W3C verifiable credential data model. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the projects that we are involved in that use these standards, and just to show the versatility of these standards. In the SVIP DHS program that I was talking about before, we are involved in the personal credentials cohort. So that is about digitizing personal credentials and personal credentials use cases. But one of the other pieces of work that we've got going on in the B2B space is using DIDs and VCs for an airline ecosystem to help IATA kind of modernize its B2B identity management stack. So IATA has a whole set of coding structures and kind of legacy systems that don't really talk that well or allow entities in the ecosystem to authenticate that well across the silos. And there's, again, many counterparties involved in these ecosystems. So they needed to think about a different approach. And so we've been working with them using these standards, these open standards, W3C standards, to define exactly how decentralized identity capabilities can modernize those types of interactions. And there's actually a 7-part video series, if anyone is interested, on IATA's website that we co-created with them to show exactly how that works and how verifiable credentials can actually show up in the real world across these types of ecosystems. So do go and check that out if you're interested. So I didn't want to take up too much time. So this is my last slide. If you guys have any questions or want to look at some of our resources on our site, we have a really fantastic website and YouTube channel. And we have something called Matter Learn as well, which has got a whole bunch of technical content for people that are interested in understanding more about the standards at a technical level, how they show up. We've got a bunch of stuff in there about our product as well. And our product is really the instantiation of these standards and making it easy for developers. So we're kind of at the plumbing layer of the product stack. So we provide all of the things that can be modularly sort of orchestrated into different credential type workflows using these standards. So as you can see over on the right there, sorry, on the left there, that's the kind of model that we operate in, where we work with partners in the space, deeply in the standards community, and then sort of instantiate those in our product capabilities. So yeah, if you've got any questions, please reach out, and thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Luke. Thank you. And thanks so much for your presentation. I'm really grateful to have you with us, because you're one of the people who are actually building the infrastructure. So for us, it's really, really good to learn about it. For instance, me, I don't have a technology background, so it's always really interesting. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, so I just wanted to mention as well, so we have heard the different standards, we have heard the different projects to bring them to life. And recently, the ICC Digital Standards Initiative has published a standards toolkit for cross-border paperless trade. And it will be mentioned in a link in the chat. So if you're interested, it really comprises all the standards that we talked about today and even more. So now in this part, we will look at the questions that we have received, and I think there are a few in the question box. So there was one question, I'm just going to read it because it's a bit long. I think it's for Sue. As the head of global customs programs for DHL Express, I can appreciate that global standards are a worthy aspirational goal. However, when applying Monte Carlo type configurations, using the massive data sets, there are still billions of possible outcomes. That said, it is critical that the industry adopt a minimum mandatory multimodal data element approach and agree on the use of these minimalized, globally agreed data sets. This is especially true for risk analysis and cargo targeting programs, where transit times are impacted by increasing data demands. So how do we contain the continuous expansion of additional mandatory data elements and globally agree on these minimum data elements? So I think, Sue, this is maybe something that you could respond to.
I will try. As I mentioned, my good friend, Greg Ferguson, we've worked together for a long time. I think one of the, we hope that the work we're doing and have been doing for years contributes to the issues you mentioned, Greg, because if we can take for granted that we have common semantics that we understand and we know where they are applied and used in the global supply chain, it helps everyone not to have to work on that over and over again. One of the key areas I'm very, very happy to be working on, which I didn't get the chance to mention today, is the single window environments. When you have a single window to government, it's very important that everyone recognizes there are two sides, as there are to every window. There's the government side and there's the business side. We have this project that I mentioned in my presentation, which is looking at linking the semantics of the WCO data model, which is the framework for the governmental side of a single window, with the work that we've been doing and which I described. I think following that work through, Greg, and contributing to that and coming up with answers to your questions through that type of collaboration will be key. That's my contribution to how we might move forward. Does that answer your question?
I hope it does. I don't know if you can respond in the chat maybe, but I think it was a good response, and it's just always important, I think, for the private sector and governments to work together when developing these kind of data models. Then there was another question. How far is the AEO, the Authorized Economic Operator programs, gone so far as WCO initiative is concerned? More specifically, how many countries have practiced AEO across borders? Those not in the system are due to what constraints? I would think this is not really the topic of today's panel. I mean, to my knowledge, I think it's around 80 or 90, around 100 countries who have AEO programs that differ quite extensively. So I'm not sure, maybe Ben, you're referring to the mutually recognized agreements. And if you're interested in that, ICC has recently published input on the SAFE framework update that is taking place, and we are talking a lot about the AEO programs and what business things could be improved. So I will leave a link later in the chat.
So maybe I can help you with that on the US side.
Perfect. Yeah.
So I did want to let you know that the US is working with the Border 5 right now, experimentally with some blockchain distributed ledger technology. And it's with the mutual recognition agreement countries that we're doing this. Part of the issue that I think you're going to run into at an international level is security, because you cannot put all of the data out there for everybody to see across the board. So you have to have pockets of security when you're doing this. That's going to make it very convoluted and very complicated. So if you want to do one-on-one exchanges versus multiple exchanges and then subsets of exchanges, the security level gets very difficult. And I'm not sure that the technologies that we're experimenting with are at that level of scrutiny right now, but we're starting off simple in order to make headway and see how this is actually going to work, taking those baby steps to make sure it's going to work correctly. The last thing I'll end on is that not only are we taking the MRA agreement countries so that they can have benefits and utilize them. So for instance, if we're working with New Zealand and they have already cleared their AEO company and they can get US benefits as well, we're working on that on the product side as well, so that when we're seeing those shipments come in, we're able to accept the credentials. So it's very interesting work, and we have started down that road. But anyway, thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks very much, Vincent, for your response. Yeah, and I think it's always really a challenge. It doesn't mean that there are the number of AEOs doesn't mean that it can work between the countries so well. That there are so many challenges that have to be considered. There was another question for Mr. Manoj or Mr. Mario, thanking them also for the excellent presentations. So we came to know about the development at Mumbai Airport and Multimodal Exchange and Standards Link. Since India is a developing country, can we bring more standards to the Indian infrastructure through the multimodal exchange and raise the standards through FDI or trade? I don't know if one of you maybe want to respond to that one.
Okay, let me just try. The idea is that the standards are not to be there on the shelf and stay there. The idea is to implement them. And when we talk about digitalization, there are many different projects. Everybody is working on that. But if they are not aligned, in India, I believe there will be, there are many projects on digitalization in international trade. But the point is to have the same language, to use the same semantic standards, etc. So if there are projects that are covering India, we strongly encourage that they look at the standards which we showcased today. Sue was talking about the UNCFACT publication of the standards. It is on the CFACT website and on this project website which I showed. So if people want to know how this is done, we are open. And among the other tools that we are developing, this week I think we will finalize a document which shows how the standards can be used in real world development of electronic document equivalents. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I think there were some more questions that have been responded to in writing. And since we are approaching the end of this webinar, I just want to thank everyone again for being with us today, and to the speakers and also the participants. And I'm going to turn it over to Armin from UNESCAP to close the webinar. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Florence, for this. First, I would like to thank you all the participants that, following their interest, found time and joined us for this very interesting webinar. And of course, our experts, panelists sharing their knowledge and experience, much appreciated. And especially, I would like to thank you for all those moderator, speakers, experts that joined us with a huge difference time, let's say, in globally. And it's very much appreciated. I'm sure that all of us will take away from these two sessions. Before concluding the webinar, I would like to bring your attention first about the next webinar, as well very interesting topic on digitalization trends of preferential and non-preferential certificates of origin, ECOs, as we like to call them, organized by UNESCAP-ADB and co-leaded with the World Customs Organization and International Chamber of Commerce. I can say that the two key leading stakeholders in this area, I guess. Where we will have excellent panelists as well. Please join us on the 27th of April at the same time. Second, I would like just to run 2 minutes video about UNESCAP Framework Agreement on Facilitation of Cross-Border Paperless Trade in Asia and Pacific, an international convention on interoperability and cross-border trade facilitation. After this 2-minute video, for your attention, we will have the webinar deemed as concluded. Thank you very much. Thank you once again to everyone, to all participants, and the experts, speakers, and moderators. I hope we will have a fruitful also cooperation for the upcoming webinars that we have planned for 2022. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.